The virtual rainbow brings together LGBTQ+ youth and their families, community leaders, professionals, and healthcare providers to learn and celebrate diversity and inclusion. Thank you for joining, everyone, and welcome.
Descriptions or terminology that might differ based on demographic area or geographic area of our country. I ask that you recognize that just like anyone else, we cannot just stereotype everyone into certain labels, and some terms might be better accepted in some areas of the country or certain populations than others. So similar to what Catherine said in her presentation, a brave space to be able to offer comments in the chat box of questioning any types of terminology is certainly welcome. This is the time for us to be able to have those civil conversations. Yep. So given that, let's go ahead and get started. The objectives for today's presentation are to build awareness of best practices to support both youth and adults.
Sorry to interrupt, Kayla.
Certainly.
You're not sharing your presentation, so sorry about that.
No. Okay.
Go ahead and try to share again.
Sure.
Yep, there you go.
Is it there?
Perfect.
Okay.
Great.
So our objectives are to build awareness of best practices in supporting our LGBTQ youth and adults, recognize the affirming language that we can use in extension documents, and also just cooperative extension programs to adhere to their land-grant university non-discrimination policy in the development and delivery of extension efforts designed to engage all people.
Yeah, for the most part.
So this is the guideline that ECOP supports for our universities to back when we go to making sure that our programs are inclusive. This is the statement that allows myself and colleagues with Ohio State University Extension and 4-H in Ohio to say, our governing body of ECOP allows for us to follow and encourages us to follow our land-grant university non-discrimination statement. For those of you who might not have been aware of this letter, again, it was posted in 2018. There's the web link is quite long there through aplu.org, but it does have this document available for you.
Understood, yeah.
So let's think about that. We know that nationally, each one of our states might look a little different in policies, in politics, and in guidance that's being administered. So I can speak, as I said, simply to Ohio 4-H programming. So where I'm going to start here are a few examples. So one thing that we've been able to do is recognizing that dress codes can be gender neutral. So instead of having something that was once male specific or female specific, thinking about maybe it's a more dressy occasion, a formal scholarship awards dinner, or an event where we're expecting our 4-H young people to dress up. Instead of having a column of dress requirements for the males and for the females, why can't we just offer a formal dress code? So we've been working on changing any of our statewide interactions that instead of having a gender-specific dress code, that we allow it to be gender neutral. We'll include items such as, if it's formal dress, that a business professional suit or skirt would be acceptable. If it's business casual or casual, we're going to put in words of terms of pants or capris or shorts of an appropriate length for everybody, not just for the boys, not just for the girls. And then also in regards to gender specific is allowing our registration for events to allow for open-ended response to gender. And I'll speak a little bit more to this later and why it's important, but you can simply include on a registration form the word gender with a blank line. It's the same way that somebody would fill out their first name, their last name, their t-shirt size, and so on. By giving them that blank line, they get to write what their gender is. Again, we think back to that gender identity, that gender expression, that gender that somebody perceives of themselves. They get to write that in, and how affirming that could be for a 4-H young person or even a volunteer or staff member who's truly labeling their gender for who they are, not picking it from a drop-down box or having only two options of male or female. Where we do only have male or female is health forms. So the reason that our health forms continue to be male or female is because of biological needs. Truly, to be more inclusive, it should have intersex as well. But in speaking with 4-H camp nurses and program support who make sure that we have everything managed from a medical standpoint, male and female are still indicators of making sure that we take care of this human for who they are biologically. So recognizing if we are collecting a medical form and we have a young person who is staying at a camp overnight without their parent, we might recognize their gender as what they wrote on the paper as a boy. However, their biological sex, when we look at their medical form, might say female. Well, that female biologically might respond differently to a level of medication that is different than if that individual is a biological male. Because this information is confidential and secured with only our camp nurses and the directors of such a program, we are able to monitor that use of limited information being shared elsewhere. But that is why our health form still remains male or female. Where that is different is simply because if somebody is registering for an event and we need to know where to house them, we base it on their gender, not on their biological sex. The last bullet point here is about our pre-event information. We clearly state in many of our statewide programs that we have the non-discrimination statement in place from OSU and that we're a federal program. By accepting those federal dollars, we need to make sure we're inclusive of all. Some of the language that we use that I would encourage others to include in their welcome letters or introduction notes to a camp or to a program is that this is a self-affirming identity, or you can have a self-affirmed identity in our program. We are open to all, and we will all treat each other with respect. So whatever is most comfortable for language for you, I encourage you to try and put that in some of your documents.
I was just trying to use my cell phone too.
So for example here,
to use video.
determining cabin assignments of a participant. So at our example camp here, the 2020 best 4-H camp that ever existed registration, many of you have probably seen spreadsheets of data and information of participants, of adults, of staff. And if you ever narrow down those lines of information and remove some of it, you might end up with just their first name, and you don't know what gender they are and what appropriate housing they should be assigned to at camp.
Yeah.
So if you were to just look at this left-hand column and see names such as Chris, Alex, Jesse, Taylor, fairly gender neutral, we need to make sure that we've allowed those folks to enter their gender identity in their registration form, because we might find that Chris is male. We have definitely had a Chris who accidentally got put in the wrong cabin because of an assumption. There's a difference between Christine and Christopher, right? But if you have some of your individuals who register with that open-ended line for their gender as non-binary or genderqueer, those don't fall as cleanly between one side of the river being the boys' side at camp and the girls' side at camp. So there are definitely ways that we can recognize and honor that individual's identity without outing them at camp. So my suggestion here is if you do have somebody who fills in a gender open-ended line with something such as non-binary or transgender or genderqueer, that as the director of that event, it is your responsibility to reach out to that individual and say, hey, Alex, I recognize that on your form, you indicated non-binary. At our camp, I can tell you that we have sleeping accommodations that are primarily female and primarily male. And based on somebody's gender identity, we expect that you will be respected for that, as well as you respecting others. But we need to make sure that you are safe when you're here at camp. Since we don't have any individual housing locations and we cannot put you in an individual space of your own, where do you feel most comfortable? So of course, I don't know Alex's biological sex. This is not about their anatomy. This is not about this individual's sex assigned at birth. If we're truly going to be an inclusive program, we honor their gender identity for who they are when they are coming to our program. if we're able to offer something that allows for individual sleeping accommodations, with minors that typically does not happen. With adults, a little bit more often, if we're going to have hotel rooms or dormitory shared or separate sleeping quarters. But when it comes to bathrooms as well, we don't have somebody standing at the doors checking to say, well, what's your biological sex? Are you allowed to come in this one? That's not how we operate. So when somebody identifies their gender, we recognize that for who they are. So again, moving forward with Ohio 4-H examples, we ask, this is a true screenshot of the health form that we collect from them. And again, this is not how we would be asking them to identify their gender. This is for their biological sex that is only shared with the healthcare professional. Whereas before, the slide previously, we use an open-ended line for their name and their gender. Another example to give a few different visuals here is when it comes to the clothing and having some dress codes. So this is truly an excerpt from one of our camps, and we included some clip art and actually a picture of one of our OSU football players to recognize what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So while we have acceptable shirts with sleeves, especially for our dining hall, we do not want tank tops, cutoffs, or crop tops. You'll notice that some of those clothing materials might seem more feminine or masculine, but we don't have to put in boys can't wear this and girls can't wear this. It is simply as all of them would read the same letter, these acceptable and non-acceptable clothing options apply to them. We also do the same with swim attire, and that also gets into a little bit deeper discussion of recognizing what swim attire is most appropriate. When it comes down to the question of modesty, or at the bottom bullet point, just a rule of thumb, if you have to ask if something is appropriate at our event, the answer is probably no. So those are some examples that we can share from Ohio. And another success that we have had in helping inform our educators and informing our staff of recognizing the needs of our LGBTQ youth and peers includes the LGBTQ Summit that was hosted in the spring of 2018. This allowed for 86 attendees attending our professional adult development day, something very similar to what we're doing today and tomorrow online. It was a day just for extension staff, volunteers, and collegiate 4-H members. The Youth Summit had 54 attendees, which included young people between the ages of 13 and 19 who identified as a 4-H member or as a non-member who is interested in youth development involvement. And we had 15 different states attend that event. And so it allowed for a really great dialogue of diverse recognitions of what is being seen in these different states. And so I'm encouraged by this opportunity hosted by Montana with the Rainbows Over the Rockies to have been expanded across the country, because what we saw in 2018 was 94% of our adult respondents said this met or exceeded our expectation. And 97% of the adults and 100% of the youth agreed that this event should take place again in the future. Unfortunately, in Ohio, we have not been able to replicate this event in its entirety. We hope to again in the future, but other states are really taking that opportunity to host things like we're seeing today with Rainbows Over the Rockies. So please encourage your peers, your colleagues, and see where there's room to host an event like this so that we can help get positive education out to our teammates and our colleagues, and especially our communities. I just wanted to share a few quotes that came very positively regarded from this event, and hopefully similar things will come out of Rainbows Out of the Rockies. Overall, I just feel more connected to people within Extension and 4-H who can help me be more inclusive of LGBTQ plus members. I've never really known where to go for help. And that came from an adult staff member. Recognize it's okay to have those questions. If you don't know where to go for help, there's likely somebody else out there who also doesn't know that answer. But we do know there are people with those answers. We just have to be willing to ask. The next quote here is, I learned that 4-H is a lot more accepting of LGBTQ plus youth than I originally assumed. I also learned that others my age have the same issues I do. And this came from one of our teenage members. Another quote from an adult summit attendee says, "I've put my rainbow flag on my office door, pins from the Ohio conference, the rainbow one and my pronouns one, on my backpack that I take to all 4-H events. I've also begun having informal conversations with volunteers about what I've learned." That's awesome. Those are the kind of things that we are glad to see continue after an event such as this one. And lastly, the summit was well put together. I had an amazing time and would love to come again. It helped me feel included and accepted for who I am. And the reason I included these quotes here today is even though this group is meeting virtually, or some folks will be watching this as a recorded presentation, just knowing that there are real clientele, colleagues, and community members out there who are feeling even more accepted because of the brave leadership that some of our colleagues and organizations are able to have to do the right thing. So I hope that leaves you with a pat on the back and a smile for doing some great work today. So next, I just want to go into sharing a few pieces that you can take away from today in creating inclusive learning environments. The first is setting the stage. And without going back to the beginning of my segment, I think I might have to apologize because I'm not sure that I introduced myself with my pronouns. So the best way to do this is to welcome a group and say, "Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers, and I'm your presenter today." It's really important to set the stage because you might have people in your audience who are recognized that they are safe with you to be able to share their pronouns when they are given the opportunity to introduce themselves. Or somebody who may not have ever heard somebody introduce themselves with their pronouns, it allows them to open a dialogue of, why was that important? Why can't I just assume that somebody is a he or a she or a them or they or Z? This really allows for some positive dialogue in the right settings. So be aware of where you are and what audience that you're speaking with to make sure that you're prepared with explaining the why of utilizing pronouns as an introduction. The next is including some safe space indicators. So this particular emblem is from the Ohio State University's Safe Zone training. It's an 2-hour-long training, I believe, that after completing, you receive a magnet or a sticker that could be put on the office door or on your computer, be carried around on your laptop. So folks know that when you are in the room or you are present, you're trained in being a safe zone ally. And then the other piece is just simply symbols of allyship. This might be a magnet on your file cabinet. It might be a sticker in your window. It might be a pin that you wear on your shirt or even a pin that you have on a backpack or a briefcase. So recognize that those can really go a long way with LGBTQ representation, that somebody might see that and know that you are a safe person for them. So a few things to practice inclusion. Before I open up all of these bullet points here, I'd like for you to share some of your practices of inclusion in your program. So chat box is open. I am able to see it. My technology is working positively for me here.
I'm watching it as well, Kayla, so.
Great, thanks, Paul.
You bet.
So it might be one of those ideas that I simply shared in the last slide, but I'd like you to throw in some ideas of what has worked for you in practicing inclusion.
Great.
While you're doing nothing there yet.
Our attendees. The chat box is for chatting so that everybody can see your message. The Q&A is just a private message to the presenters. So if you'd rather keep your message private, you can send it via the Q&A. The chat box, again, if you hit all to all participants, everyone will read it.
This is great. I'm seeing some in the chat box. I can't see the Q&A, but in the chat box, very specific example from Michigan State University. Every video and presentation that's put up has a non-discrimination statement at the beginning and the end. That's excellent. That's a good reminder to put things at the end. One individual mentioned wearing name tags and sharing pronouns. I love that. If I was at a presentation such as this in person, you can bet that my name tag, if I got to write my own name, would have my pronouns written below it. And I encourage people to add those when they can. Maeda shares LGBTQ plus pride buttons and shirts. Excellent. I know that our friends in Washington have some great 4-H pride shirts that I am proud to wear as well. Another individual shares asking participants to share how they want to be addressed. Absolutely, that is very important. Thanks for addressing that, Kimberly, because it's much different for me as a presenter to introduce myself first and then allow for others to engage versus me just going up to somebody and asking them. So I might say, my name is Kayla. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. It's nice to meet you. Would you mind sharing your name and pronouns? So again, offer up some information about yourself before expecting that from somebody you meet. So thanks for filling in those comments, folks. So here we go. Here are the things that I had preloaded. Introducing yourself with your own personal pronouns, reminding your staff and volunteers to model appropriate behavior. This is so important. It goes back to those guidelines, policy really, of our university, that volunteers are expected to uphold this same status as our staff. Listen with an open mind. Do not make assumptions of others. Take action when you recognize others engaging in conduct that might be harassing or discriminatory, such as interrupting inappropriate jokes. Next, speaking up with the voices that are not present. Being devil's advocate. Somebody mentions something, and while it might not appear to apply to anybody in the room, and you say, well, think about if I was so-and-so, or give a description of somebody who that might have been describing. Would you have said that if I was in the room? And be honest and be clear. Show your allyship by bringing that up. And then lastly, express confidentiality. It's not your role to out an individual, whether that be their sexual orientation or their gender identity, whether somebody might be a trans person. That is truly offensive, impersonal, and can really lose a lot of trust. Not to mention a Title IX violation, depending on where you might be working. So recognize that if somebody does share with you something important about themselves, that they're doing it because of an element of trust and that they see you as a safe person. And that is really an honor. And I would like to, if there's anything that somebody might be taking from new steps of how to practice inclusion, is to express that confidentiality with somebody. Expressing to them, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm humbled and honored that you trust me with this information, and I will do my best to support you in the pronouns that you're using. And if I ever make a mistake, please feel free to interrupt me so that I can make it better. So whatever that looks like for you to be very authentic in those conversations, please do it. And I'd also like to share a quote from one of my camp counselors. I've learned this a few years back and I share it on nearly every presentation, is what is learned here leaves here, but what is said here stays here. So in an environment like this where we're online and maybe not interacting in person, and somebody might share a personal story, they've shared that personal story with those in the room. They didn't share it so that you could repeat that story elsewhere. But what you learned from that story could definitely leave the room. So again, keep that in mind. What is shared here stays here. What is learned here leaves here. And I'd like you to take a look at this slide once more before I move it, and notice that there is nothing on this slide that entitles just LGBTQ youth, LGBTQ youth populations, or any other sexual orientation or gender minority. These are all ways to practice inclusion for any other underrepresented group, whether it be listening with an open mind, not making assumptions of others, or speaking for the voices not present. I truly encourage you to practice these yourselves. Many of you are likely doing an awesome job, so encourage others to do the same. So here are a few more things. I want you to think about this slide before I reveal the answer. What are some positive terms that might be used when welcoming a group? So one thing I would suggest would be, I'm glad to see everyone here. or welcome folks. It's great to have you join us, and I want to welcome each and every one of you. There might be a few things to avoid though when we're welcoming a group. And some of you might have guessed that might be gendered language, such as welcome men and women, or ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the show, or boys form a line here, girls form a line here. There are definitely some difficult ways that these have been utilized, and it might be difficult to find a gender neutral response, but I challenge you to find that welcomed, inclusive language the next time that you are in front of a group. When introducing yourself, this is something that we briefly mentioned, and this might be the specific quote that you take away of, I've never had to introduce myself with my pronouns, and now I know what to say and how to say it. So here it is. My name is Kayla, and my personal pronouns are she, her, hers. During today's program, if you feel comfortable to do so, I invite you to practice introducing yourself with your pronouns as well. You might see people use the term personal pronouns, preferred pronouns, or simply pronouns. I would encourage the use of pronouns or personal pronouns. Preferred pronouns makes it seem like they have pronouns, but then there's the preferred ones. But truly, somebody states their pronouns, those are their personal pronouns. Those are the pronouns that they should be used when being addressed. Another piece when you're inviting people into a group setting, a building environment that might be new for them, describe the locations for restrooms, and if applicable, indicate where gender neutral locations may be found. They might not be specifically gender neutral, they might be single user or family restrooms, but those are important. And simply by setting that stage at the beginning of a presentation, it will allow your audience to feel comfortable knowing that whoever's hosting this event is welcoming of being able to use the restroom that feels most comfortable and safe for someone to use. So in addition, somebody asked a question here, how do you address it if your location doesn't have gender neutral restrooms? So this is a great question because when it comes to something like Ohio State University, any of our programs are expected to be non-discriminatory. So we technically should have a safe option for everyone to use the restroom. Just like we would need a handicap accessible restroom, we need to make sure that everyone feels safe having a basic human need using the restroom. I apologize that I probably don't have the most direct answer of how do you address it if your location doesn't have a gender neutral restroom. What I would advise is if you're giving a group presentation and you say, welcome to such and such auditorium, you'll recognize the coat room just outside the door to the left. Restrooms are down the hall on the right. If you don't have to say male restroom, female restroom, you can simply say restrooms and not indicate that there isn't a gender neutral form because that just might draw too much attention to it. Another thing you could do is have on a sign, perhaps, as people are entering, or maybe it's on correspondence about them coming, is we are a affirming environment and welcoming of all. If you require any additional services, recognize that you are comfortable asking so-and-so who is the director of inclusivity to make sure that everything from your, I would say, food accommodations, physical accommodations, but gender neutral restrooms also fall into that. So if it's not announced, I would hope that somewhere in correspondence it recognizes for any other needs would be recognized. So I apologize, I don't have the best answer for that, but I would not draw attention to that not being there, if that makes sense. I do see another comment in the chat box, and thank you for giving feedback. I've seen some events put up signs over a restroom saying it's an all gender restroom. Absolutely, that is an awesome example. For the office I work in particular, we have the male and female restrooms on the first floor, and then we might do that on the second floor where there are smaller smaller number of stalls per restroom and make those all gender restrooms. So there are definitely creative ways of doing it. Talk to the folks you work with and see what makes most sense for you. Again, we want to focus on people's safety. So here's some more examples. In conversations, you might want to make sure that your language that you're using, if for a minor, they need a document signed. Please be sure that your parent or guardian signs this document. Sounds a lot different than, please make sure that your mom or dad signs this document. An individual might have two moms or two dads, or they might have only one of their parents because somebody passed away, or somebody might not be involved in their life. So it's a lot easier to just do that more neutral language of parent or guardian signing a document than specifically indicating a mom or dad. Another piece with conversations or examples, if it's appropriate to do so in your professional or personal world, if you're describing yourself or a participant, using a word of their spouse or their partner, or if it's your spouse or your partner, instead of using a specific term such as wife, husband, boyfriend, or girlfriend, that would describe an individual's gender identity specifically. This isn't because you're trying to hide who your spouse or partner might be, but it also allows for recognizing that other people will hear you use that non-gendered language and see you as an ally and a safe person who would be accepting of their spouse or their partner, their same-sex partner, their significant other, however they choose to introduce them. So the other piece here is not in conversation, but in written correspondence, is registration. The gender open-ended here allows for self-identification. It also allows them to not answer the question if they don't have to. The things I encourage you to avoid at all costs are check boxes for only male or only female. If you do have the check boxes or you have drop downs and you can only have a limited number, I would highly encourage you to remove that use of other, because if you do not identify as male and you do not identify as female, I'd like you to put yourself in the shoes of how it would feel to have to check a box that says other. So please recognize that. If you need to, use something like any gender not listed or prefer not to disclose, and allow for a space, an empty line there if you can. I know electronically, sometimes our systems don't allow us for personal input. So if you do need a radio button, please avoid the use other and try to use the term any gender not listed. In closing here, I just want to share a few resources, again, because this was intended for extension-based professionals and recognizing how we work with our clientele outside of a university. These are a few resources from Ohio State. For your university, you likely have an Office of Human Resources, as well as somebody who works with the Title IX agency or office. So these are the resources specifically from my institution, but I would encourage you to find out who those people are, and you include those in your presentations or in your documents that you send out to folks, just like somebody shared in the chat, that they remind people of their non-discrimination statement at the beginning and the end of a presentation. I also encourage you to seek out safe zone training at your local university. It might not be a public university, you might be at a private or smaller college or school. Likely there's a multicultural center of some sort, and if they offer training for LGBTQ allyship, it's definitely not a bad idea to look into it. Even if it comes at a small cost, the cost of being an ally for somebody and the positive benefit that those couple hours and maybe a few dollars that you spent could really change a life. So I encourage you to look into those safe zone trainings. Being here on the Rainbows Over the Rockies probably certainly counts for some safe zone points. You just won't get to leave with an awesome sticker to put on your door afterwards. Additional resources that I wanted to share with you all, again, as it's specific to extension-based programming, the university resources here at Ohio State. You might find that your university doesn't have a collection of online resources, but another neighboring community college or university might. Don't be afraid to look into those websites. Here is specifically from Ohio State's Equity and Inclusion from our College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. And the second link here is the ECOP Next Generation Extension Learning. It includes the YouTube clip where they talk about Extension adhering to the non-discrimination statements of their land-grant institution. So in closing, I would like to offer my email address and phone number for folks who have questions. We do have a few minutes to be in the chat box or the Q&A. This picture is taken from the Ohio 4-H LGBTQ Summit hosted in 2018. Myself there in the tan blazer and Jennifer Sarangelo in the black blazer. Jennifer is the CEO of National 4-H and came to give a welcoming address to our young people. And Ohio 4-H is definitely proud of the opportunity we've had to invite young people and adults from across the country to that event, and look forward to continuing connecting with many of you here. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I'll leave this slide up so you can take down my email address if you'd like.
Wonderful. We have a few minutes for questions, so if you'd like to type those in again. Q&A is meant for more private or anonymous questions, and the chat is you can pose to everybody or just to the presenter. So Kayla, I know you can monitor those yourself, so I'm glad you can see those. Great information.
I would like to put a little commercial break out there, especially for those of you in Extension and specifically 4-H. In 1 hour, we have a presentation on practices for inclusion of all genders and sexual orientations. And this is a National 4-H program leader work group supported document. Catherine, who you heard from about an hour ago from California, myself and Joe Rand will be going through that document because it is meant to be utilized and adapted for each state. So some of these topics specifically to 4-H will come up a bit more in depth. So tune in again in just over an hour.
Great. Again, we've got a few minutes for questions, and I just to maybe provide a little bit more of an overview of our intent. Today on this first day, Thursday, our objective was to provide kind of more of a national focus, allowing our colleagues from across the country a platform to talk about their programming. So the following 2 days, Friday and Saturday, we will be focusing. Our presenters will be mostly from Montana and focusing on Montana issues, but today is the day that we're focusing more on national issues. So again, encourage any questions or comments in the chat. Kayla, seeing none, any parting words for us? I think there was a lot of good interaction throughout your presentation.
Certainly. I just want to encourage people who are on this call to continue doing good work in the face of adversity. Really, it can be tough. And speaking from personal experience and professional experience, you will find your people who will be champions for this kind of work, who will support doing the right thing for our young people in our communities. And I just want to encourage each and every one of you who are already making that step, that it doesn't go unnoticed. And I really wish I could see everyone's faces and kind of get together for some more social interaction. But I hope that our paths will cross again sometime soon. So thank you again, Montana team. And we'll see some of you again on some other presentations coming up.
That's great. Thanks again, Kayla. We'll hear from you soon enough. We're going to take just a quick break until the top of the hour. So until then, again, don't log off. Stay logged on. Our next presenter will start in about 3 or 4 minutes at the top of the hour. We'll look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks again, Kayla. We'll see you soon.
You're welcome.